There's a saying that a good marriage is made in heaven. But does God really have anything to do with who we marry? Living Truth takes to the streets to ask people if God plays a role in choosing a spouse.
No, I think you're in control of that. I don't think God has anything to do with that.
Depends on the person who's choosing the spouse. If they have a faith in God, that may be that may inform their decision. If they don't believe in God, then it's nothing to do with it.
Personally, I think I want a husband who believes in God, who's like a Christian.
I've chosen my spouse, and religion did not matter.
God doesn't really play a role for me in choosing a spouse.
I think the higher power, if you want to call it God, definitely it does play a role, because what you feel inside pretty much is the higher power.
No, God doesn't impact how I choose a spouse. For me, it's much more about my value system and do we have a good laugh together.
My wife was God sent, handpicked and sent down by the big man above to me.
I don't believe God plays a role in anything. Not your spouse, not your work, not your play, nothing.
I had no choice in it. I had no say in it. It's out of my hands. I'm not responsible.
In finding your life mate, I think that is kind of there is a guiding hand there, possibly, yes. But I'm not sure.
I don't think necessarily I consulted him. I think you just go with your own feelings.
God does not play a role in choosing one spouse. I just let that happen.
If you have a firm belief in God, then you're going to take very seriously what it means to love, to be sincere about that love, and to be truthful.
On today's program, Charles Price gives a practical lesson from the Bible on how to choose a spouse.
If you have a Bible with you this morning, I'm going to read from Genesis chapter 24. I'm going to read just the first few verses, though please keep your Bible open because I'm going to look through the whole of this chapter with you in the next few minutes. But let me read you Genesis 24 and verse 1. Abraham was now old and well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. He said to the chief servant in his household, the one in charge of all he had, "Put your hand under my thigh. I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I'm living, but will go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac." And the rest of the 67 verses of this long chapter are all about Abraham's servant going as he was instructed and finding a wife for Isaac, a girl called Rebekah, and bringing her back and then marrying. This is the last great act of Abraham that is recorded for us before in the next chapter, 7 verses later, he dies and is buried. And over a number of weeks now, we've been looking at Abraham and seeking to learn some lessons from his walk with God. A journey, I've called it, on a rocky road of faith, because there were lots of bumps and twists on this road that Abraham was on, as there are on the road that you and I walk. And I want to talk about this because so much space is given to one of the longest chapters in Genesis, and it's all about finding a wife for Isaac. So I thought, well, let's look at this very practically this morning. It's a very practical message. I'm calling it How to Find a Spouse. Now, I have 10 points, so fasten your seatbelt, hold on tight. We'll get through all 10, but we won't be able to flesh them all out as much as I would like to. The first point I want to make is very simple. There is a time when it's right to marry, and there's a time when it's premature. Why do I say that? I say that because in these first 4 verses, Abraham recognizes that Isaac is 40 years of age. That's a pretty good age. His mother Sarah has died. But more importantly, God has made a covenant with Abraham in which Isaac is a crucial player, because the covenant involves that he is going to have as many offspring as the stars that are in the sky. He's going to have a son, which was Isaac, that God gave him, and through this son he's going to have a nation that is going to bless the world. Therefore, it is totally logical for Abraham to conclude somewhere along the line Isaac needs a wife, because children are part of the arrangement that God has made with Abraham in order to bring about descendants. And it's important to face that question, is it right to marry? Now, some of us never ask that question. We just assume that if we happen to bump into the right person, that'll be right. But actually, there are two reasons why some people will not marry. At least I'm going to suggest to you two, there may be others as well. It is normal and it is natural and it is, in most cases, what will happen. The people will marry, of course. But there are two reasons. One is, Jesus talked about the fact that some people renounce marriage for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. That is, there's some people who are called by God to be single. In Matthew 19 and verse 12, Jesus was talking about marriage to his disciples, and he said, some have renounced marriage because of the kingdom of heaven. And then he said, if anybody can hear this, listen to it, but some of you will not be able to hear it. Somebody came to me after the first service this morning who has been a missionary and said, do you know that there are twice as many women as there are men on the mission field, and most of them are single? That's not 50%. That'll be about a third of all missionaries are single. Called by God to a ministry that they could best fulfill on their own. Now, if God does call to that, he equips, because in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and verse 7, Paul talks about singleness and marriage, and he speaks of singleness as a gift. Some have this gift from God, he says. And he goes on to say that he himself did have this gift from God. Now, most of us don't think of celibacy as a gift. We think of it as a fate. And by a gift, I think what Paul is meaning is this, that if God calls you to be single, or if you're single for any other reason, God will equip you to live singly. There are many folks who are single because they are widowed, or their marriage is broken up, or there may be other factors. God will equip you to live singly and to be satisfied in that position. That's the first reason I suggest that some were not married. The second reason is not as spiritual as that. It's simply a question of arithmetic. There aren't enough of the opposite sex to go around. Statistically, globally, there are about 106 male births to every 100 female births. Now, in the course of time, because men tend to die on an average 7 years sooner than women, the balance of male-female is just about half and half that's alive in the world at any given time. When you join the church, the statistics reverse. There are more female Christians than male. According to George Barna, who is a research, he says in North America there are about 6 female Christians to every 4 male Christians. And that means, and we're going to comment on this in a moment, if those Christian people are to be faithful to what God has required of us, that we only marry those who are already Christians, we'll comment on that later, there are going to be a lot of female Christians who are not married because God has some way called them to be single. There simply aren't enough men to go around. Now, being single is not second-rate in any way at all. I wish I could talk about it this morning, but I can't. But the single state is to be affirmed very much in Scripture. Very much. Now, if we're honest, there are disadvantages in being single. If we're honest, there are advantages in being single. But there's little worse, probably, than marrying the wrong person. And in my many years of working with young people, I was forever encouraging folks, resist the pressure to have a girlfriend just because everybody else does. You've got to wait the time, the right time, and let God guide you in this matter, as we will see in just a moment. But that's the first point. There was a time to marry. Second point is that she or he need to be from amongst God's own people. Let me read you what it says in verse 3. Abraham says to his servant, I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I'm living, but will go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac. Why does Abraham say you need to get a wife from amongst my own relatives. Because it was Abraham's family that's in a covenant relationship with God. And she needs to be from amongst God's own people. Now, there are a number of references to the Old Testament about that. That if you're in the covenant relationship with God, as Israel was, you need to marry other people who are in that covenant. In the New Testament, the same thing is repeated several times. In 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 14, Paul says there, do not be yoked together with unbelievers. Now, a yoke is a wooden crosspiece you put on the necks of two oxen. One may be stronger than the other. You can adjust the yoke so they're pulling together. They're going in the same direction. They're sharing the same objectives. And he's saying when you're yoked together, it must be a believer with an unbeliever. Otherwise, you'll start pulling in different directions. And you'll live by different values and for different purposes. Now, many have made a big mistake in this area. Some have even felt, I've had these conversations, you know, if I marry him, maybe I'll lead him to Christ. And I've said in conversations like that, which I've had many times, no. If you want to be faithful to Scripture and therefore to God, don't even get into a relationship with them that is romantic or of this nature until they've come to know Christ. Now, I've sat with folks who say, you know, I've got a problem here. I married him, he's not a Christian, or I married her, she's not a Christian. There's big problems now because of it. You know, well, they're simply reaping the consequences of their own disobedience. In 1 Corinthians 7, verse 39, Paul writes there, a woman is free to marry anyone she wishes, but he must belong to the Lord. And therefore, we must make that decision in your mind. When is it right? And she must be from amongst God's own people. That is, if you are a Christian. If you're not a Christian here this morning, I'm extremely glad you're here. What I'm saying about that is in-house. You'll appreciate that, but I hope you become a Christian very soon. There's lots of beautiful girls and beautiful guys, if you need one, who are already Christians. Just by the way. Here's the third point. The third point is in verse 7. Let me read it to you there, where Abraham says to his servant in the middle of verse 7, he will send his angel before you so that you can get a wife for my son from there. What Abraham is saying is this: God is involved in this process. Don't panic. Don't get desperate. Don't grab someone just for the sake of it. God is going to guide you in this area. Because you see, God is already at work preparing the person that you're going to marry if you're going to marry somebody. And he's already at work in preparing you. Now you say, does God have a plan in this area of our lives? The answer is most definitely. If God has a plan for us at all, you can be sure this will be one of the crucial ingredients, because this is one of the most important things in your life. The two most important decisions you ever make in your life is, number one, who is going to be my master? Now, don't say you don't have a master. We do. No one can serve two masters. You love one, hate the other. But to whomsoever you submit, says Scripture, you become a servant of that to which you submit, either righteousness or sin. It's either self-oriented or it's God-oriented. Second most important question, having decided who's going to be your master, is who's going to be your mate? And therefore, God in his own time is going to lead and guide. Don't present an agenda to God. God, I need to be married by 22 and I'm already 21. Come on, speed up. You might find somebody when you're 22 if that's your goal. But it may not be the right person. Let God in his own time lead you and guide you. The fourth thing is, it says in verse 10, remembering, it's time to marry. She'll be from God's own people. God is going to guide. All that is in place. And in the fourth stage, verse 10, it says, then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and left, taking with him all kinds of good things from his master. Now, you need a camel at this stage, preferably 10. Now, the point here is he starts looking. He says, all right, the time's right. She's going to be from God's own people. God is going to guide me. You don't sit around and catch marriage like you catch the flu. Sit around folks who got the flu, you probably pick up some bug and get it. Sit around girls doesn't get you married. You start to look. You actually choose to marry. You know, the idea, you know, I've heard it from people who have been married. Oh, I fell in love with somebody else. I just couldn't help it, just fell in love. Yes, you can help it. The Song of Songs, which is a wonderful love song in the Old Testament. 3 times in that love song, Solomon says, do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires. Don't awaken this too early or with the wrong person. You're not a victim of love. And so when the time is right and you're trusting God to guide, and it's time to waken up love in this sense, then start to look. And then the 5th thing is, in verse 24 it says, then he prayed, O Lord God of my master Abraham, give me success today. That's a bit of an urgent prayer. The point is, he prayed. You know, when I was in my early 20s, I remember praying and saying, Lord, I'd like to get married sometime. I've never met anybody I'd like to marry yet. But I'd like to meet somebody before too long. I don't know what her name is. I don't know where she lives. I don't know what she's doing. I don't know if she's a Christian yet or not. I presume she's alive, otherwise there's going to be a very big age gap. But you know her. You know everything about her. And, you know, it's getting on. Could I meet her sometime? Well, I began to pray for her. I wasn't praying that she'd bring me, God would bring her into my life. I was just praying for whoever she is. I said, Lord, I don't know who she is, but lay on my heart ways in which I can pray. And I had a real sense, actually, she wasn't a Christian. I began to pray that God would save her. And actually, she wasn't a Christian at that stage. When I eventually met Hillary, she'd not been a Christian at that stage. She was actually going through a very traumatic, painful time in her life. And I sensed something might not be right. And I prayed that God would guide her, keep her safe, and even though she was unaware of it, that he might eventually bring her to himself. Well, it was not until I was 27 I met Hillary, and it was, I met her in a corridor, and I greeted her as I passed her by. We didn't have a conversation, but when I saw her, I sensed that I knew her, and I thought, she is the girl I'm going to marry. In fact, I wrote to my best friend that night, and I said, I've just met a girl I think I'm going to marry, but I don't know her name yet. That's absolutely true. He was best man at my wedding. I then actually got to know her a little bit, and I discovered she had a boyfriend. So I put his name on my prayer list with a big boot next to his name. And I prayed that he would go before too long, and lo and behold, I heard in the grapevine a few months later that she had broken up with him. So I thought, I'll leave her just a few weeks, get over it. She was studying in Scotland at university, and I was living in the north of England at Capernwray Hall, and I was going to go up to Scotland to speak at an event, and I would be relatively close to where she was studying, and so I thought I'll just call in and visit her. I'm up there anyway. I'll just very casual. And I was in the office in Capernwray one day, the day before I went. I said, I'm going to go up to Scotland for this weekend. I'm going to call in and see Hillary Ollerton. They all knew her because that's where we'd met. She'd come to Capernwray to work over the Christmas break from university. And there was a guy, an Australian guy in the office, and he said, oh, would you take a note for me, take her a letter for me? And I thought, yeah, sure, that'll give me a great alibi to go and see her. So he gave me his note, a little package actually, and I carried it all the way up, and I went to see her, and I said, I've got this note, and I didn't know that this was a love letter. Absolutely it was. And he jumped in ahead of me. Hillary made a bit of food, I sat and ate it, while she read this letter and wrote a reply, which I took back. So, and he became her boyfriend. I was the courier in between the two of them, took a note up and back. So I stuck him on my prayer list with a big boot. And then that broke up, and then she got involved with somebody else. I mean, they were lining up for her. It took her 2 years to see the light. And 2 years of waiting, and actually I gave up. I thought, no, this is wrong. This is foolish of me to even think this. But I'll come back to that in just a moment. But he prayed. And I want to recommend to you, if you're single and you'd like to marry, don't just pray, Lord, bring him into my life, bring her into my life. Just pray, whoever it is, Lord, lay on my heart how I can pray for him. Because I honestly believe that is why when I met her, there was, in me at least, a rapport and a sense that I knew her. The sixth thing is that having prayed and set off on his journey, he sort of set a little trap to catch her in. It's down in verse 13. He said, see, I'm standing beside this spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a girl, please let down your jar that I may have a drink, and she says, drink, and I'll water your camels too, let her be the one you've chosen for your servant Isaac. The point is, he is looking for character. He's looking for issues of kindness, of generosity. He doesn't say, you know, as I sit by this well, when the most beautiful girl comes down the road and I say, hey, I'd like a drink, let her be the one. Now he says, I'm looking for issues of character, of kindness, and generosity. You see, to marry on the grounds of physical attraction alone is actually a recipe for disaster. Apparently, those who work these things out say that marriages based on physical attraction alone, or even as the primary ingredient, last between 6 months and 2.5 years. If you're not sure about that statistic, just look at Hollywood. Hollywood is made up of beautiful people. You've got to be good looking to get there, by and large. And they've made a dog's dinner of marriage. If anybody is married for any length of time, it's reported with almost amazement that they've stuck together. Now, of course, we will be physically attractive to our partner because you love the person. And because you love the person, you love the body they live in. But you know, good looks might be a handicap when it comes to looking for a marriage partner, because if you're not a stunning beauty and don't get wolf whistled, you girls, when you walk down the road, and you guys have girls swooning at your feet, when someone does fall for you, they're likely to have a much, much better reason because of who you are. And whereas physical attraction is an ingredient in marriage, and you will like the person, of course, it is only a very superficial ingredient, and it will change and decay, and all around I see, says one of the hymns we sometimes sing. That'll be true in your physical body, and hers and his. The physical appearance and physical attraction is an ingredient, of course, in marriage, but it is the icing on the cake. It's not the cake itself. When you marry, it's for better, for worse. There's going to be probably more worse than better. And it's for both. So he looked for issues of character, qualities of character. Seventhly, and I'm racing through these, but then I said I would need to. Seventhly, verse 15 it says, before he'd finished praying, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She was the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, who was the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. So she was in the covenant family, so that was right. The girl was very beautiful, Well, that's incidental, but she was. A virgin, no man had ever lain with her. Therefore, she was single and possibly available. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up again. The servant hurried to meet her and said, "Please give me a little water from your jar." "Drink, my lord," she said. That was a good sign, my lord. "Drink, my lord," she said, and quickly lowered the jar in her hands and gave him a drink. After she had given him a drink, she said, "I will draw water for your camels too until they have finished drinking." Bingo! The trap has sprung. That's exactly what he said. She says, "I'll draw water for your camels." So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough, ran back to the well to draw more water, and drew enough water for all his camels. Now, here's the bit I want you to notice, verse 21. Without saying a word, the man watched her closely to learn whether or not the Lord had made his journey successful. Everything looked right, but he didn't say a word. He watched her closely. Seventh point, he got to know her as a person. He didn't barge in and say, "You won't believe this. I'm here on an errand. I work for Abraham. He's got a son, an eligible son, who needs to marry. I'm looking for a wife. And I said to the Lord just a little while ago, if this girl offers to feed my camels, let her be the one. You went and offered to feed my camels." She would have turned tail and ran home as fast as she could go, probably, if you just landed that on her. No, he watched her closely. He saw her under the pressure of getting the water. And it says she ran back to the well to draw water, put on her head, ran back. This is the origin of running water, I think. And it says, you know, this is a cultural issue, I'm sure you'll understand. It says the man watched her closely. There's this poor woman running with buckets of water, and the man just watching her closely, you know. 10 camels, remember. Camels have a lot of storage space for water, a lot of water, you know. And he watches her closely. The lesson, the principle is, he got to know her. He observed her under pressure. It's very important we get to know the girl or the guy, not as a potential spouse, but as an individual. Sometimes, and maybe we men are more prone to this, we see our wives as an extension of ourselves. She's first and foremost an individual person with her own individuality. And the implication of this, watching her closely, is building friendship together, seeing each other in different situations as wise and good. Frank Sinatra used to sing a song that said, "And then I go and spoil it all by saying something stupid like, 'I love you.'" There's a time when that's far too early. And he watches her, gets to know her. Eighthly, it says in verse 22 and 23, when the camels had finished drinking, the man took out a gold nose ring. Now, you need to have one of those handy, plus a tool to put them on with. Now, when the camels had finished drinking, the man took out a gold nose ring weighing a beaker and 2 gold bracelets weighing 10 shekels. Then he asked, "Whose daughter are you?" Why is he doing that? He's finding out about her family and about her history. She answered, verse 24, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, the son of Milcah, born to Nahor," etc. He found that she was related to Abraham. She was within the covenant family. That was important. But there are 2 aspects to this. Number one, you, of course, do not marry the family, but you do marry the product of a family. The person you marry brings a history with them. And those 20 years of living at home, or 18 years, whatever many years it was, were years that were begun with a blank sheet of paper, and her parents have written all over that blank sheet of paper, and some of that writing is indelible. It's formed who she is, who he is, what their fears are, what their expectations are. It's very important you understand the family background, the culture of that family, the expectations of that family. In Hillary's family, just for one silly example, but nevertheless, it represents the point. In Hillary's family, when she was growing up, her dad always took the garbage out every week. In my family, when I was growing up, my mum put the garbage out every week. We never discussed garbage when we got married because we didn't need to. I knew the wife takes out the garbage. I knew. We didn't need to discuss it. She knew. She didn't need to discuss it either. The husband takes out the garbage. We know these things. So after we married a couple of years, we were climbing over a huge pile of garbage one day. So, Hillary, I think you might have forgotten something. Well, actually, now you mention it, why aren't you fulfilling your responsibilities? What do you mean? Well, why aren't you? Because the wife takes out the garbage. No, she does not. The husband takes out the garbage. Where did you learn that from? Well, my dad always did. Yeah, well, did he? Your dad took the garbage out. Oh, I never heard of that before. That's a silly thing. But they're sometimes very important things, too. Very deep-rooted things. You need to know about each other. But here's the other side of that. So there are two aspects. That's the one aspect. The other aspect is, he needed to know that she was related to Abraham. And therefore, under the covenant relationship with God. In other words, he needed to know where she stood in her spiritual position. And you need to know the spiritual history and experience of God, because you need to be compatible in that area. This is the most important area of your life. I have great difficulty understanding people who I've talked to who've said about their wife or their husband, I thought she was a Christian before we got married. I discovered she's not. I have difficulty understanding that, because a person is not a Christian just because they have a profession of faith that they make. You know they're Christians because they have an appetite for God, and God is the most central person in their lives, and you bring that to each other. You see, we're made up of spirit, soul, and body. I want to suggest to you that in a marriage, in a Christian marriage, a good marriage grows in that order of spiritual oneness, united together in Christ, soulish oneness, so there's personalities you learn to mold to each other, and out of that comes the physical oneness, and the physical oneness, the quality of the physical union, will be very much related to the quality of the soulish and the spiritual union. And a woman will know that better than a man. Because sometimes we men are satisfied just with the physical union. But a woman isn't. Because we're made spiritual, soulish, and physical. And therefore, in getting to know about her family, he's finding out about their relationship to the covenant with God. And you need to know each other spiritually. You may be at different stages and places in your walk with God, but that's okay. You learn to grow together. And the ninth thing is that in verse 34, having found out about her family, verse 34, he goes to see her parents. And he says, I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has blessed my master abundantly. He's become very wealthy, etc., etc. And he explains his business all the way down to verse 49. He basically retells the story that's just been told to us in the earlier part of this chapter. He tells about saying to God, I'm going to ask this girl for a drink, and if she says, I'll feed your camels. We get the whole story twice. He explains to her family very clearly what has gone on, and in verse 50, at the end of that explanation, it says, and this is a cultural context when the parents were very involved in this decision. It says, Laban and Bethuel, that is her father and mother, answered, "This is from the Lord. We can say nothing to you one way or the other. Here is Rebekah. Take her and go, and let her become the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has directed." Notice this. They both saw the guidance of God. He didn't go to them and say, "Listen, I've been praying about this, and I set this little trap, and she sprung the trap, and all the pieces fit together, and I want you to know she is the right person." He says, "This is my story. Now, what is yours?" Do they mesh? And the parents said, "This is from the Lord. We can see it's from the Lord." And it's vitally important that we both sides see the guidance of God. And we both see the guidance of God independently of each other. Now, I believe the role of the family in this is an important role, but I want to say to you, your parents don't make the decision about who you marry. Don't say, "Because my mom and dad really like him, I think, they think he's right." Well, okay, if they think he's right, I like him, but I'm not really sure, but okay, if they think he's right, I don't trust him. Don't do that. Wait until you're right. Don't say, your boyfriend, "Well, he's such a godly guy, and he walks with God, and he says it's right, it's from God." Okay, I'll accept that. You get your own guidance from God. On both sides. And you need to know this is from God. You see, I told you that I had this sense that here was the right person, and every time I tried to get close, bang, because there were other boys on the scene. And so I not only lost interest, I decided this is foolish. I'm not even going to be interested, and I managed to lose interest. And I won't tell you all the circumstance of this, but then Hillary was in a situation when God, it's her story, not mine, so it's quite a dramatic context in which God showed her that I was the person that she would marry. I have to be honest and tell you, she didn't actually like me at the time. She didn't. But she began to feel this was... And so she became interested in me, and which I rebuffed. Because I'd already given up. But eventually, of course, when we did come together and we did marry, I knew God had led me to her, and she knew that God had led her to me, separately and independently. That may be a little unusual. My kids tell us that our story is absurd. Never heard any story like it, Hannah told me. But I'm telling you the truth. And all our stories are different. But they both saw the guidance of God. And then the 10th and the last point is, in verse 57, it says, "Then they said, 'Let's call the girl and ask her about it.'" Good idea. Well, of course, it's a different context where the families were much more proactive in this arrangement. But they said, "Let's call the girl and ask her about it." So they called Rebekah and they asked her, "Will you go with this man?" "I will go," she said. And probably said, "Where are we going?" The point is, Rebekah said, yes. At that time, of course, you're running on the biggest risks of your life. This is now a lifetime commitment. I remember when I proposed to Hillary, I'd invited her to come with me. I was going down to speak at a weekend conference in the south of England, about a 300-mile journey from where I lived. Her mother lived just a few miles away from there. And on the way down, we stopped and had lunch, picnic lunch, and I asked if she'd marry me, but I said, "Don't give me an answer now. I don't want to spoil this weekend. Tell me on Monday on the way home." I don't know if that was a good or bad thing to have said, because that weekend I thinking, if she says yes, this, if she says no, that. And I began to think, if she says yes, I am stuck for life. What if it doesn't work? So by the end of that weekend, I was thinking it would be a relief if she said no. So we drove the 300 miles back to her mum's place and drove and parked outside her mum's house. And we didn't say anything about this at all. And I said to her, after 300 miles, I said, I asked you a question on Friday. She said, yes. I said, is that your answer, or are you agreeing I asked you a question? No, I'm agreeing you asked me a question. Okay. Have you got an answer? She said, yes. I said, is that the answer, or is that saying you've got the answer? I'm saying, I've got the answer. Okay. What's the answer? She said, yes. And my immediate gut sense was, oh no. I am stuck. It's the best decision ever made, though. Interestingly, although Isaac and Rebekah were brought together so clearly, God guiding both sides, both recognizing it, both agreeing to it, sadly, their marriage had lots of difficulties in it. We don't know too much detail, but we do know after 20 years, they had no children for 20 years, which must have been a source of frustration for them, but after 20 years, they had twins, Esau and Jacob. They were not identical twins, totally different. Esau was a hairy, outdoor man. Jacob, it says, was smooth. He was mama's boy. He stayed at home. Esau did the shooting, the hunting, and the killing of the animals, and Jacob stayed home and helped Mummy make a nice stew. And you may know some of those stories. Quite different. And he became a mama's boy, and she got Jacob, and she taught Jacob to lie. She taught Jacob to twist. She taught Jacob to cheat. She taught him to steal what didn't belong to him. Get the birthright that belongs to your brother. His mother put him up to it. Very sad. In fact, you know, it's quite hard to find good marriages in the Bible about which we know enough detail. There are marriages we don't know anything negative about, Mary and Joseph, but we have just a tiny little insight into their marriage at a very difficult time. And I suggest to you that although you might marry the right person, that doesn't mean then everything is going to go easily and smoothly. You know, finding a husband or wife and marrying them is only probably 5% of the process. The 95% is learning that the two become one. And that process will go on and on and on. And I suggest that there are 3 fundamental ingredients that should be there in a healthy marriage: a mutual respect for each other, a mutual trust in each other. If you violate trust, it takes a long time to rebuild. And out of that will flow a mutual love for each other. Mutual respect, mutual trust, and a mutual love. Where you respect each other as individuals, not just my other half. You are an individual I respect. Trust each other because you are totally trustworthy to each other and in your life that you live. And out of that, the love will be natural. It'll flow. But if you undermine the respect and the trust, you probably undermine the love. But let me say this in closing. Anything to which God calls you, God himself is committed to. God instituted marriage. And God is committed, therefore, to marriage. And even if you say, well, you know, I married, you know, if I had my time over again, I wouldn't marry this same person I married this time. No, I'd marry somebody else. Well, you married this person. God is committed to making that marriage grow and work. Make it an environment of safety. That's the most important thing about marriage, that you're safe with each other, that you're secure with each other, that you're protected by each other, that you build protection around each other. You've got somewhere to go when you're afraid, somewhere to go and weep when you need to, somewhere to go and share the most deep things of your life. Whoever you're married to, God is committed to making that marriage work as you bring him in as its architect, as its Lord. Marrying the right person is a good start. Isaac and Rebekah did that. But the story kind of falls apart a bit after that. not because it was wrong. Well, I hope that's helpful to you. It's a very practical message this morning. For some of you, it won't be of much value because you don't need it. Others of you, it might even send you home to break off a relationship. If it does, good. You need to do it, if that's right to do it. Others of you, give you a sense of patience. Let God in his own timing bring you in the right way to the right person.
Don't miss next week's Living Truth. Charles Price begins a new series on Colossians, Staying on Track.